I mean,
MTV in my household, speaking of the 80s, it was like, we all need to have an intervention if MTV has landed at my home. So
this is bad.
yeah. And now MTV is like child's play, literally. Just like, what?
Yeah.
That's
totally.
Welcome to Brainstoke. I'm Tom Telford here with Clair Mellenthin at Wasatch Family Therapy. We are so happy that you let us come. This is great.
I'm just glad you're here. I think this is going to be a great time.
Thank you. That's awesome. First question for you. Tell us how you arrived as being a therapist, international traveling, doing all you're doing, including earning a PhD in this next year. Start there.
So when I was young, I thought I was going to be a criminal profiler because I loved Patricia Cornwell's like murder mystery books.
Yes.
And so I'm like, oh, that's what I want to be when I grow up. So mental health has always been fascinating to me. And in college, I had the opportunity to go do a humanitarian expedition to Africa when I was 19 and my little sister was 17. And we just went by ourselves with this group. And we went to this little village where we were like the first white people that had been there before, like all the kind of things. Yeah. Wow. So Lisa and I, my little sister and I, we, are number 3 and 4 out of a family of 8. And so we were like the Pied Pipers of like the little kids of the village. And like wherever we would go, like we just had like this train of little kids following us. And, what we found and in some of my most cherished memories of that time is we didn't share language. We didn't share culture, but we did share in play and dance and singing and laughing, and those types of things. And I came away from that experience really with a changed idea of not only who I was and who I wanted to be, but also the population that I wanted to work with. And, realizing that I could connect with these little ones so easily, so normally, so naturally, even with all the barriers in place that, potentially would have prohibited that, really began shifting my world into like, I still am fascinated with mental health, but I want to work with little ones. And so, I was really fortunate to be able to have undergraduate internships, which we don't really see anymore in mental health. Like you have to be in graduate school. And then, I was really fortunate in graduate school to kind of get thrown into doing play therapy. I didn't know that's what I was doing at the first, but I had amazing mentors and connections along the way that really immersed me in this work that I love and I'm so passionate about doing now. And I'm really grateful because I grew up in a family where I didn't know any different. Like this idea of social work and becoming a social worker, my parents, like my whole life have been collectors. And, my first experience of social work, looking back on things is when I was just tiny and my parents were super young. And they and their friends banded together in the 70s and sponsored a Vietnamese family to come from the refugee camp and sponsor them to come to America. And we grew up with them and grew up celebrating holidays and sharing time and sharing space. And this was just one of so many different times in my life where I watched my parents, like through their example of just reaching in and doing the good that you can do in the spaces that you're at and the ways that you can, and so I think not only becoming a play therapist, but being a social worker, has been something that I just feel very clearly led that that's where I'm supposed to be, and having, these life experiences that I've had that have really shaped who I've become as an adult has been, pretty significant.
It sounds like the love and lift mentality was part of just growing up for your family.
Absolutely.
Tell us a little bit more about that, siblings, what it was like, where you grew up, the environment?
So, as I said, I'm the third oldest of 8 kids, and we grew up in Salt Lake City, up in the avenues. And our house, I kind of was laughing with you earlier. Our house was like the Dennis and Menace house. Like, we had all of us and the chaos that 8 kids bring, but it was also the gathering spot for all of our friends. And so I have no idea how many times and how many bodies, my parents fed, because it was their mentality has always been,
Yeah.
there's always room for more. So we had friends for dinner. We had friends for family home evening. We had friends on every single family trip. We had friends, it's like
Yeah.
all of this, like there was never a go away. It was a come in, and so like really being raised by parents who really live by that mentality of there's always room for more, pull up a seat, build a longer table. Like I think that has been incredibly influential in my life, and where it's like sure, there's boundaries and expectations and, go out and do good things and
Yeah.
build a longer table.
Yeah. I love that. There's something there that I've now seen in you. I see in therapists. We get the chance to meet with a lot of therapists. I'm married to a therapist, and there's some consistent theme that goes on about this concept of bring others along with you. It's not just about get out front, win at all cost in business and grow, grow, grow and see where you can get, but how many people can you bring along with you? And it sounds like that was just part of your growing up and mentorship from your parents. Was it both parents?
Absolutely.
Was it both of their mentality? Your mom? Was it so collectively that was just part of family culture?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think like you meet my mom, like my mom has never met a stranger. I mean, just remember like a couple of years ago, even like we had all gotten together. They were home for the summer, and I think we were like getting like mani pedis or something
Yeah.
like that. And so all of us sisters were like just yapping to each other and not really paying attention to the people who were, offering us a service because we were just happy to be together and catching up and all this stuff.
Yeah.
And by the time it was done, my mom knew the entire backstory of the woman who was offering her services and where she had come from and how many kids she had and where her family was. And I mean, her whole entire life story, in this space of an hour. And my mom just sat and was with her,
Yeah.
and that's just who she is. And, and my dad is very similar. I mean, in his own way, but I mean, he's able to go. It's amazing the things that he's been able to do and the relationships that he's built, but very much the same way of like, I'm present and I'm here and I want to know who you are. We had shared, I'd shared with you earlier, like, growing up, my dad was a mission president for the LDS church. And even now, I mean, this is like 30 years, 25, 30 years later, he still has mission. Like just like 2 weeks ago, he had missionaries coming in to visit him from the time that he was a
Wow.
mission president. Like he's made both my parents, but my dad, has maintained these relationships all
Yeah.
these decades later. Where it's like he still has these cute little boys and girls who, are middle aged people like us now, but calling to celebrate with him or when hard things are happening. I mean,
Yeah.
it really is kind of just incredible, like the love that they have for humans.
I love that. And there's so much here that we're going to, this is a term in Brainstoke. We're going to double click on this because the timing of you talking about this and sitting with you is a little uncanny for me because 2 weeks ago, my mission mom, my mission president's wife, passed away.
Oh, I'm sorry.
And it's okay. She's an amazing woman. And I was at her funeral service, and it was a moment in time of me thinking about this concept, which is the people who go through life who are willing to give of themselves that others can become. And sitting with that group of people that day, tons of missionaries who were there. But as I sat there and listening to the funeral service about, her name's Jerry Martin, I was amazed by, to be frank, by the mothering of the world that goes on. And I just sat there thinking, this is a woman who raised a family, served a mission. A year after they came home from their mission, her husband, my mission president, tragically passed away. He literally had a heart attack. Imagine this, a heart attack going back to the mission where they were there after they had returned. They were there to dedicate the new temple in Minnesota. And he had a heart attack in a mission, couple hundred missionaries in the chapel, President Hinckley, and he had a heart attack there. And he passed away. And if I go deeper, I'll just break down. But fast forward now, I'm at this funeral service and I'm sitting in the audience just kind of watching this. And in my head, I'm going, Mother's Day's tomorrow. This is a woman who literally mothered hundreds of, young teens, for the most part, punks, really,
Right.
struggling to figure it all out. But it was just a moment in time in me thinking, man, the planet really is mothered and loved by hundreds of women, mothers. And before we just hit record, we talked about you traveling and now what you're doing internationally. In so many ways, you're teaching play therapy, you're teaching professional therapy, but you're really teaching people to love and lift in a way that humanity frankly needs, which is why I want to be here doing this with you, because it needs to be told more and more about what is going on, in my opinion. By the way, because I just bringing this story up, this woman, my mission president's wife, I call her my mission mom, my second mom, she had such meaning to me in mothering me, which we're going to get into my backstory. But she meant so much to me that when I had my children, my youngest, his name's James Martin Telford. He was named after the Martins, who is President and Sister Martin. And at the time, I had a few people say, well, don't you want to name, your son after, your mission president? He's a boy. And I'm like, no, I want her name in it. That was important to me to have them carry on, because as much as he was my mission president, I know who mothered me through those 2 years.
Yeah.
And it was her, And so anyway, it's cool to be here with you talking about this, because the mothering that you are doing is incredible. Mm-hmm. And I have to say this, I don't know your mom, but when I think about women who are doing what you're doing and who raised you, I think, man, what a 100x life that your mom through you has now spread across the world. You just mentioned Europe. You mentioned China. This is a woman who's traveling the world, writing books, speaking, teaching other people how to love and live. What a legacy.
Thanks.
So tell us about your mom.
So my mom is awesome. Where to even start talking about my mom? She is a quiet powerhouse, and I was lucky being raised, in Utah in the 80s and 90s. It's a pretty conservative space.
Yeah.
And also being raised in a home where my voice mattered, and it was what I thought mattered, how I believed, even when it was in conflict or difference from, choices that they wish that I would be making and those types of things. But my mom is a quiet, fierce lady, but she loves fiercely. And, like we were talking about, but just never met a stranger, and I've never heard really thinking about all the things and all the snotty things that we did growing up or things, but I really have never heard my mom say something bad about somebody else. She doesn't go, just these things that just in her own way, really shaped us. I think all of us so much, us girls especially. There's 5 sisters. Mm-hmm. There's 5 of us girls. And now as a parent, we would try to get under her skin, and I'm sure we did so many times, but she treated us with respect and kindness too. And, there's been lots of conversations now that I've been a mom now for a minute of I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I was such a turd.
Eating crow is the worst, isn't it?
It's the worst.
It's the worst.
But my sisters and I laugh all the time because, like, in those, like, just when you're in the mud with your own
Yeah.
kids, it's like, all right, channel your inner Mary. What would Mary do? Channel your inner Mary. Find her in there.
Mary. Okay, we got it. We now know Mary, Mother Teresa. This is the vein we're in. Where does confidence come from? I'm curious. So, LDS family, large family, relatively traditional, Salt Lake. Where does the confidence that your mom had and lives with, where did that come from?
That's a really good question.
If she's quiet and yet she's strong, where does it come inside her to sit with strangers and just get to know them, fearlessly get to know whoever?
I think that is just the core of who she is. I mean, I think probably both of our parents had parents of the Depression era and World War II,
Yeah.
and like you pick yourself up by the bootstraps and
Yeah.
all that good kind of stuff. And she and my dad, took a lot of the good things, and they also together made, very conscious decisions when they became parents that there was going to be lots of words of affirmations and I love you and affection, and all
Yeah.
the things that maybe wasn't so common with, that era of parenting, that they had.
Yeah.
And, thinking back, I mean, I wish I would have known my grandma when she was young, but, she was her own little sense of feistiness too. And, we loved hearing the stories of, she kind of bucked traditional roles and trends for a little while too. Like, when she was in the World War II eras and stuff, she was a nurse and she chose to go to New York City and leave
Wow.
Salt Lake, and like have her
Unheard
own
of.
adventures.
Wow.
And, didn't
Yeah.
get married until she was 30, which is like, oh, serious old maid there,
Yeah, totally.
But she like had a life and lived a life, and and my parents did too. And I think, like with my mom and my dad, like their philosophy for us growing up, I mean, we were lucky that we had the means to do so, but, it's like really in order to understand the world and to love the world, you also need to experience it. And so we were really, blessed to be able to do that. And we'd go on all sorts of crazy adventures by ourselves. And my mom really, she just loves people, and she loves helping people and meeting people and really taking time to see them and to experience, their world in the different capacities that she has been able to and can. And, I think really instilled in all of us that same joy in being able to do that.
Beautiful tribute to your mom. I don't know that there would be anything harder than raising 8 kids.
Oh my gosh.
So talk about,
I can't imagine. I have 3 and I like am drowning a lot of days,
I have 3 as well.
I'm like, once you're outnumbered, like it's a whole new game.
Yeah, totally. 8 children. Yeah, I think that gives you a lens though.
Yeah.
An entirely different lens for one, what you're capable of, hearing you describe your mom sitting with people, getting to know them, having this kind of inner strength and confidence. If you raised children and you survived, I think you probably could survive anything.
Some serious badge
right?
of honor there.
Yeah,
for
like
sure.
you basically have never slept your whole life. You've never had a square meal. Like this is basically, what it's. This is the toughest parts of humanity. But no, that's incredible. You described you and Lisa, your sister, going on this international experience to a small village. How did your parents trust that?
Oh, we look back on being raised in the
Was this
80s and 90s, like all the time
faith-based?
of like, holy cow.
Was that faith-based, or was it like, hey, there's 2 less mouths to feed? Like, let's just send
Good
them.
luck. I don't know.
Yeah.
No, our parents had a lot of faith in us, which
Yeah.
is amazing. And we didn't even we didn't even question it at the time. They're like, hey, you guys want to go to Africa? It's like, yeah, let's go. And, but that was also like not the craziest thing either for us. Like, even though it's like so out there, I don't know. But, like part of growing up and traveling is, I'm sure it was not this, easygoing as I remember it. But there was lots of times it was like, hey, you want to go to Israel for a couple of weeks? Hey, you want to go do this? And, and for us, it was, like, hey, you guys want to go do this? Like, go join this group of strangers and go to Africa
Yeah,
for 6 weeks? Sure. Why not? What could possibly go wrong? Um,
exactly. I love it. But it all becomes part of the smoothie, right? The
yeah.
Claire smoothie, which is how does one have the background that you do and end up now fast forward into this role of I'm a therapist and I'm writing books and I'm speaking to groups of people and I'm now capable of doing this, what I would consider pretty complex work. It's the work of the mind
Yeah.
and dealing with heavy pasts and trauma and so your past and your story, right? It informs now who and what you're doing today. It seems like pretty significantly. Maybe before we jump there, tell us a little about your immediate family because in doing all that you're doing, I bet success is happening at home too.
Oh, some days. We
Of
have
course.
we're a really normal human family. So, yeah, so I'm married to an awesome human named Matt, and I'm like, he really is just my best friend in the whole world. So we'll be married 22 years this fall. We've been together about 24, which
Awesome.
is kind of this weird milestone this year of realizing like, okay, I've been with you longer than I've been alone as an adult.
Yeah,
Like it's just a wild thing.
that is a wild thing.
Um, so weird.
Good job, Matt.
I know,
Well done.
really, that he's hung in there all this time. But so we have 3 kids who are just awesome. And we're kind of entering into like seriously big kids phase. So my oldest will be 21 this year. And then I have my oldest son. And then I have 2 girls who will be 19 and 17. And it's so fun watching them grow up and who they're becoming. Like they're just awesome humans.
Very
And
cool.
so different from each other.
Are you a better parent as a adult parent to, adult children, or do you miss that younger age of children? I always feel
I
like there's a natural, like I can connect better at certain ages, in my parenting.
I've been lucky, and I think that like what I do for a profession definitely helps that. But like I honestly can say like I've loved all the stages. And each of the stages have had different hards and different phenomenal wonderful things too. And yeah, like when you have like, the memory pop up on Facebook from like 10 years ago and you have like these little squeaky voices and skinny bodies and you're like, oh, just take me back for just like 2 minutes to just squeeze those little ones.
Just 2 though.
But just 2.
Just 2.
I do not want to do that over again.
Yeah, for sure. Not that night's sleep, just 2 minutes.
No, just as, and like at a time like where there's just so much innocence and easiness,
Amen. And then the phone era rolls around.
Right. And it's like, oh, and the things that our kids have to grow up in right now and the world that they have to grow up in is hard. Like, I don't know. I don't honestly know a kid who hasn't had a hard path. And that's, not just talking about clients, but like, honestly, like I don't know a kid who hasn't had a hard path the last several years. And some kids, of course, have fared better than others, but I think it's easy for us as adults to, think back of, and look at teenagers and like, oh, I remember what it was like to be a teenager. And there's certain things that like, yes, there's like the age old angst and developmental milestones and stuff. But the world that our kids are growing up in is something I don't think any of us could have ever begun to fathom.
Yeah.
Like not only like with the technology and stuff, but like armed intruder drills at school. Like, I mean, they grow up in a world like believing that it's not safe, and in a lot of ways, it's not.
Yeah.
So there's some incredibly resilient little ones coming up in this next generation.
Yeah, and I want to dive all into that, because this is your profession. When I think about, social media, the news, all this stuff, right? When I just kind of take it all in and I think, wow, is the world a mess? Or are we all just more informed? Are we more just diagnosed? I don't know what it is, but it seems challenging. So who do we then turn to as experts? And Claire, you're an expert. So you're
I wing it a lot of times.
right. But do you know what I mean? I
Yeah.
mean, you become and have become a voice of hope for so many parents who are asking all those questions. Like, what do we do? Even hearing you say there are no children who don't have or who are struggling, and I think a lot of parents, they don't necessarily even see it, right? And I don't mean that in a negative way to our listeners. I, as a parent, don't even necessarily know if a smile's on the kid's face and they're going to school and they seem to be interacting relatively well and they're not burning our house down, like that's a win,
Right.
right? But that doesn't mean that there's not a lot of boiling water inside under the surface of children. And I think there is a lot that we don't necessarily even know what to look for. So, can we pivot there?
Yeah.
Can we
Do
go
it.
there?
Let's do it. Because I think that's actually a really poignant thought. And I think as a parent, not only just doing what I do, but as a parent and surviving adolescence and all these other, ages, and knowing that I still have a lot more to go through with my kids and learn and grow. But I think that you nailed it on the head. There's always stuff happening under the surface that we're so oblivious of too. Even when we know things as parents, like,
Yeah.
oh, there are some things I remember. Like I remember,
Yeah.
but our kids are living in a world that's completely different from what we grew up in.
When I think through what you just kind of described, there are so many people who today have a thought or a sentiment of, well, if we could just go back, if kids could just go back and were like us, or they walk to school in the snow, uphills both ways. Do you know what I mean? Kind of this reflection of mindset of, well, if kids just knew or did what we did, the world would just be fine. And to a degree, I understand where they're coming from. But on the flip side, it's like, is that even a relevant question to ask? It's not that world. It's not going back. So then what?
Right. Well,
What do we then do?
I think every generation of parents has said that.
Totally.
I mean,
MTV in my household, speaking of the 80s, it was like, we all need to have an intervention if MTV has landed at my home. So
this is bad.
Yeah. And now MTV is like child's play, literally. Just like, what?
Yeah.
That's
totally. And, you think back to like when the Beatles or Elvis came on, and that was so scary to that generation of like,
oh yeah,
we're going to hell in a handbasket here, and then we look at that and we're like, oh my gosh, so like innocent compared to like what we're doing, right? And I think that like the reality is like we're not moving backwards. And I personally am so grateful I did not grow up in the era that my kids have to grow up now. I think that would be really, really hard. I mean, some of the things that, not only could we be a little bit sneakier about things and have a lot more freedom, but, kids right now, it's like every mistake is videoed and put out there for the world for the rest of your life. And I think about that. Like there was a couple of years ago, Monica Lewinsky did a TED Talk. I don't know if you ever heard it.
Yep.
But she asked, everyone in the audience, who ever made a mistake when they were 21 or 22? And everybody raised their hand. Hers just happened to have national attention on it, right? And when we think about the magnitude of what that has been in that poor woman's life, she was such a baby and was just vilified and put out there for the world to see in her very worst, worst moments. And then that is what happens to kids every day on social media, right? And that is hard to grow up in a world like that. Or on the flip side, when you see everybody else having these wild, fun, crazy adventures and you're home alone again and again and again and again. And when we grew up, right, like maybe you had the lonely times, but you couldn't watch everybody else have fun without you.
Yeah.
Like it's a totally different kind of lonely to have.
Yeah. And it's not as if, because in hearing you describe that, I can hear people saying, I've heard it in my own family gatherings, well, just turn off the phone. And there's as much pressure to be on it, right? So if you're not on it, you're left out. But if you're on it and you're left out, then it's, do you know what I mean? You can't win.
No.
I mean, it's a very challenging situation to be in. So Fast forward, kind of double click on that thought of just the pressures of social media and growing up today. What are you seeing that comes into your practice then as a result of some of the social pressures? And then talk through just ages at earliest kind of sign of those things.
So I think just starting from like the top down, because it's not just kids who feel a lot of the social pressure, right? It's parents who feel a lot of the social pressure, and parents who they're in the same boat as their kids, right? Like, I mean, we've always had like kind of like the keeping up with the Joneses, right? Like, I mean,
Mm-hmm.
and there's, I think, living in Salt Lake area in the Salt Lake County, there is a lot of social pressure to perform here. There absolutely is. We have a very perfectionistic kind of purity culture going on that makes it really hard to feel successful and to feel that you're not failing at something. And I think that there's a lot of overcompensation for that. And we see that in parenting where it's like, kids are so overscheduled and, they're in this, like, I think parents feel like they're in a pressure cooker to perform also because like they're living in the same existence, right? And so it's like every kid is in a competition team. Every kid is,
Yeah.
overscheduled and has 70 different activities during the week. And so you are running ragged as a parent and you're having all this quantity time, but you're not having any quality time together. And by the time you get home, everybody's fried. And so, like, those moments of connection that I think, typically, normally, naturally happen when you're constantly on the go, it's impossible to actually have meaningful time together. And there's a lot of pressure to have your kids be involved in everything.
Yeah.
Um,
When you say the pressure there, are you referencing so your kids can keep up or because of the perception that I'm doing good parenting if my kids are involved in everything?
it's both. Like, in this area, if you don't start playing on the competition teams in elementary school, you're not going to be able to play high school sports. Like it starts like that little,
Absolutely.
you
Yeah.
know? I mean, there's so much pressure for kids to be exceptional at such a price of their childhood. And so, one of the things I work on with parents is choose your most important thing. Choose one thing that's important to you and ask your child what's important to them because you guys cannot survive this where you have 7 different activities every single day and nobody gets any downtime.
Can you imagine 8 kids in this environment?
Oh my gosh. No, I don't know how parents do it.
Yeah. I mean, no.
Even just, like 3 kids. I mean, we had like the small family in my family, and holy cow, like it's too much.
Yeah.
And I mean, my hat is off to parents. Like, it's so hard to be a parent right now. It really is. There's so many demands, and there's so much external and internal pressure, and it is hard. And underneath all of that stuff is so much good intent of I want my kid to be successful. I want my kid to have opportunities maybe I didn't get to have. I want my kid to be included. I want my kid to have a place. I want my kid to be safe. I mean, I think that, doing the work that I've done for as long as I've done, like I think under all parenting, regardless of what it looks like on the outside, and you have a spectrum of healthy parenting that's out there. But underneath is that desire of like, I'm trying to protect my kid. And sometimes it, just comes out in ways that maybe not, where it's not going to be as successful as others. And so I see that from the top coming, and from the bottom, like my area of specialty is like trauma and attachment issues. And I see a lot of kids currently thinking about my caseload where there's just so much anxiety. And sometimes, I mean, I have a little one myself. Like, she is just wired anxious. She came that way. And it is absolutely just how her brain works.
Yeah.
I mean, there's not, I mean, there's been events that have definitely helped, magnify that at different times, but she's wired anxious. And, and so like, in families, of course, there's, things that run through families too, like genetics play a really strong role. We see that with a lot of neurodivergence right now, and our understanding of neurodivergence is growing as a field and what that encompasses and how much we really don't know. But that tends to run in families. Anxiety tends to run in families. Depression tends to run in families. And so these types of things where it's like nature and nurture working together to magnify things is something that, I work with quite a bit.
Talk a little bit more about nature versus nurture, because when I think about my own children, they all came wired different ways. I definitely was wired a certain way. It took me well into my 40s before I really started to ask questions like, how was I wired? What did I come with? And what was nurtured? And to be honest, I'm still trying to figure out a lot of those things. And so talk more about that, just what you're seeing in your practice today and what's coming in, what's in the child's makeup versus what's in the family system that is helping nurture, some of these challenges along, and maybe the symptoms that, families are facing as a result of the combination of those things.
That is such a good question. So, our understanding of neuroscience is continually evolving, and our understanding of what is also rapidly evolving. We used to think, and this is not even until that long ago, that a lot of behaviors were like learned behaviors. Like that was like, social learning theory is like, so, total stereotypical example, I'll use you as the dad. My dad comes home angry, kicks, yells at me, so I kick the dog, right? Like that's kind of like that, example that's oftentimes used. And so we used to think like, oh, this is all behavior based. And so this kid is learning that when they get mad, this is what they do. And there is always parts of that in there. And what we also know about, neuroscience, and I'll just kind of nerd out with you for a second, but we also have mirror neurons. And so you and I are sitting in space, in the space together, and our first question our brain is looking at is scanning the environment is, am I safe? Am I safe? Am I safe? Am I safe? And there is safety within here, right? Like we came in and it was like, oh, this is an easy connection. Our brains both were like, oh, this is going to be fun. We can totally have a conversation.
Yeah.
Right. And so bodies relax, heart rate relax. And then it's like, oh, this can just be a fun, enjoyable thing. And so taking that same example, stereotypical, sorry, dads out there, of your first interaction when you come home and everybody's brain is scanning the environment. Am I safe? Am I safe? Am I safe? And all of a sudden it doesn't feel safe. Then our brains are going to respond by either getting hyper aroused of like escalating up, or hypo aroused, or, sending down.
Yep.
Not just calming. So when you go to hypoarousal, it may look like calm, but it's actually a shutting down of emotions. And sometimes that is the safest way to be, because you can kind of just slide under the surface all the time. And so dad may have had a rough day at work, and he, got the call. We're just going to make this totally awful traditional stereotype, right? Where maybe his wife calls and is like, the kids are out of control and I don't know what to do and I want you to come home.
Yeah.
Okay. So this, again, horrible stereotype of traditional based families, right? So dad comes home already wired of there is a threat and there's danger, not to mention anything else that's happened during the day in his own work life and relationships, right? Mom is totally fried. We're going to, again, these horrible stereotypical examples. Yeah. And so are the kids. So if everybody's brain is in there and searching for, is it safe? Is it safe? Is it safe? And nobody's getting a cue that safety is there and that we can regulate together, then you're going to have that spin out happen. And so this is where that like nature nurture piece goes hand in hand together. Like some things, it's just purely genetics. Just like some people get freckles and some people don't, right? And other things happen, in family systems when this is a consistent recycling of experiences together where the unpredictability becomes predictable. And so then you're in a constant state of scanning your environment of, am I safe? Am I safe? Am I safe? And so, when we think about how like problems can evolve in families, oftentimes, you know, what happens is there can be a mismatch of attachment seeking behaviors, which, in an idealistic, healthy, adaptive world, it would be like, hi, I'm so glad you came home from work. Give me a hug. Right. And kind of laughing as parents, like,
Yeah.
how often did that one happen?
Yeah. I was like, this is so great. Yeah.
Right. But, if your attachment seeking behavior is, oh, dad's home and I'm going to knock his cell phone out of his hand while he's trying to type the last message, and then accidentally hit the ball in his head, and then right, like
Yeah.
all the things of life that just happen, and that creates a rupture, right, where then parent is frustrated, kid didn't get what they needed because they didn't know how to ask for it, right?
Yeah.
And there's that mismatch. And if there's not repair of, hey, bud, I'm sorry I lost it. Like, I knew that you were, I understand that you were excited I came home and you wanted to play ball. And I should have put away my phone, like when I saw you. I'm really sorry I yelled. And it's not okay for you to knock things out of my hands. Like, that doesn't help me feel very safe and very good in here. Right? Like,
Yeah.
in the ideal world, like this is what's happening is we have these mismatches and then there's repair that happens, and mismatch and repair. And this is happening all day, every day in all of our relationships. But in families, when the repair part doesn't happen, that's when each person, parent and child, or partner and partner, kind of emotionally take a step away from each other to protect their heart.
Yeah.
And, and so my role as a therapist, like this whole long winding road later, is really to help parent and child and parents and families, because it's never just one person, right? To repair and come together and strengthen their relationships. And then when mismatches happen, it's easier to catch each other before there's a big blowout or a big repair that needs to happen.
So much there to say and understand. But even hearing you kind of describe the repair part, oftentimes I feel like parents may come, right, the spin out, because I'm now thinking child, young, doesn't know how to control emotion, go to school, all the pressures of school, all the things you talked about, right? And now they're trying to just deal with all that they're feeling and going through. Parents are, starting to recognize not doing well at school, whatever. And parents may want to bring a child to therapy thinking this is child-based. Mm-hmm. It's based in the child, their behavior, their actions, the challenges that they're having. And in reality, you just described a family system where there's a system. It isn't just a child and the child needing therapy. You're talking really about system therapy. And so often it's just interesting because the perception of therapy is one person speaking with therapist, yep, or marriage counseling, but child therapy is much more based in system.
It has to be if you want lasting change to happen. So a child is the least powerful, most vulnerable member of the family. It is such an unfair and unrealistic burden to give to them that they're going to be the change agent and change everything. They don't have the power to do that. And that's like one of like the big premises, in attachment-centered play therapy, which is the model that I developed and created, is that, if we want change to happen, it is a system shift. And the only way that that's going to happen is if we involve the people who actually have power to make changes in the family. And it's not the kids, And so a lot of, I think probably like most of my clients when they initially come are kind of surprised, to know that they're going to be actively involved in therapy with me. But but I think especially when we're working with kids, like when you stop and actually think about who has power to make change. As a parent, I can tell you there's been lots of times where I did not feel like I was the one that had power to make change, right? And I know all this stuff. Like I write books and I do all these things, right? And there's lots of days where you like barely survive, it feels like. I mean, I think for a lot of us as parents, you know, even when like I'm so lucky that I have these anchors and I had a solid childhood and I have secure attachments. I have my lifelines that I can call as a parent, right? And who can help me or talk me off the ledge or let me know that I'm doing a good enough job when I think I'm failing. And I'm so blessed and lucky to have that. And it is not a given that every parent has a lifeline to call, you know? And I think most parents out there are trying to do better than what they were given, first of all of us have our stuff that we either like, these are some things I want to carry with me, and those are the things I definitely am not bringing to my home.
Yeah.
Even when you have great parents, let alone when you had parents who tried to do the best that they could with very limited tools and understanding. And I think a lot of us as parents, especially when you are the one that's being the change agent of like, okay, abuse stops with me. I'm not going to hit my kid, or this whole sexual assault stuff is not going to happen in my home. Like, we're stopping this here. And I think, you know, it's kind of like getting dropped off on like the reality TV show of like Naked and Afraid, where you're like, I have no tools, I have no clothes, I have no shoes, and I
Yeah.
definitely don't have a map of how to do this stuff. And even when you do have a map, sometimes the landscape changes and when you're not expecting it to. You know, and what works really well with one kid, you totally have to pivot and do something completely different with the next one. And I think for me, like that was one of the biggest surprises I found out as a parent when I was like, what do you mean they need different kind of parenting? Like, hang on a second. Totally opposite personalities. Okay,
Yeah.
like I can do this.
Why can't
but,
they
like,
all just fit in
wait
the
a
same
second.
recipe?
Yeah.
Yeah, totally.
And so I think the more rigid you become as a parent of like, you have to fit my model of what I want to do versus I have to be flexible and adaptable.
Yeah.
Which is a really uncomfortable, vulnerable place to be. You know, because again, all of our goal is really at the root of anything that a parent is doing is I'm trying to keep you safe. I just want to protect you. And there's lots of times I wish, you know, being a mom, that I could have bubble wrapped my kids from themselves.
Yeah.
You know, let alone the world that they're living in. And you can't, which I think is one of the most helpless feelings as a parent, is that you can be doing all the things that you know or think you know of what to do to help your kids, and you still can't fully inoculate them from their own journey that they're going to have.
Yeah. It seems like that, in our world, you mentioned the map, that kids don't come with a map. They don't have an instruction manual, none of it. And yet, so I start thinking like, what informs my map, of parenting. And granted, my parents, my own experience, the things that I do want to bring and don't want to bring, in my parenting. And I was raised by amazing people, but so my own parenting, my spouse's, parents. But then there's this whole broad open map of how am I going to do it? And unfortunately, if you just look around you or kind of jump into the river of society and you just raise your kids like the rest of society, that's not a really safe place to be overall. I mean, there are laws, there are rules that we try to navigate, um, as the way that we raise our children as parents, but FOMO's real.
Mm-hmm.
And the fear of missing out, for our kids and us as parents, having them have FOMO, and that drives so much of the decision making that we have as parents. So talk a little bit more about that. Just parents who are willing to kind of buck the system to a degree, or the trends in society, and say, I'm going to follow a different map. I'm going to rely on these other things rather than just the norms.
So I think that this is, one of the things that I teach my clients, and I hopefully am continuously teaching my kids too, is as I'm evolving and doing my own work as well. But it's finding your inner compass, and trusting that and and listening to that. And as a parent, I think that that is a really vulnerable thing to do, because it is easier to like, oh, well, my church says to do this, or my neighbor says to do this, or my therapist, Claire, that dingbat, says to do this, right? But it's really honing in and like, what do I think is right? And then having a respectful relationship with your child and helping them find their compass. And does that mean that sometimes you're going to ground your kids and take away privileges as they make choices that are dangerous and harmful and stupid? Of course.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, you will be so much happier and successful and settled and grounded if you have a relationship to self and you can trust who you are and you can trust like your own compass of what that is. Because, for some people, like following a black and white line makes the most sense for them. Like, this is what I'm going to do to keep you safe, right?
Yeah.
Somebody else is going to have a wide open spaces and like, hey, wing it, figure it out, and I'm here. And this is what they do to help their kids be safe. And there's not necessarily a right or wrong, but it's figuring out, one, how to have a secure enough attachment so that there is absolutely room to make so many mistakes and to have a place to come home, even when you do that. Because if you don't have any permission to make mistakes, you're never going to learn. And you're going to either engage in crazy risk-taking behaviors as an adult, right?
Yeah.
Or keep yourself so small in the world that you never reach your potential. And I think that that's, as a parent, that's one of the scariest things, I think, especially as your kids reach adolescence, is allowing them to make mistakes and make decisions that are terrifying to you because you want to keep them safe. And part of that learning experience, though, is also making sure the message is, I love you no matter what, and home is a safe place to be. And, if you draw a line in the sand with your teenager, they're going to cross it.
Yeah.
They absolutely are going to cross it. If you do this, you're kicked out. Well, guess what's going to happen eventually? Someone's going to push you on that. And are you actually going to kick out your kid? And like, really, is that the line that you want to have in the sand?
Yeah.
And so that's different than choosing your battles. And I think for parents, one thing I tell my clients all the time is choose your top 2 battles. What actually matters? Because otherwise you're going to play whack-a-mole your entire existence, and you're never going to find joy and connection and happiness in your relationship together because you're too busy trying to squash something down and put a fire out somewhere. So what actually matters to you? Oh, sorry.
Good.
And
What do people say? What are the answers to that question that you typically hear? What's the most important to you?
I think when it boils down, when you get past behaviors that you don't like, I mean, that's usually like why kids come to therapy, is because they're behaving in a way that is causing annoyance or distress to the adults around them, right?
Yes.
I mean, sometimes you have these awesome unicorn clients that are like, I just really want to go talk to a therapist and just have a
Proactive.
safe place. Yeah, I mean, they're so fun to work with.
Yeah.
They do happen, but usually kids are being brought not by their own decision.
Yeah. They're not stoked to be here.
No. But I think when it's easy as a parent to have a laundry list of all the things that are driving you crazy or that you're worried about, and getting beyond the behavior and really having to sit with that question for yourself of what's actually most important. I think the majority of parents do come down to that place of my relationship with the child. And sometimes you have to do a little work to get there, right? Because, well, church is most important. They have to go to church, or they have to be on the basketball team, or they have to go to seminary, like whatever the have-tos is.
Yeah.
And, really working at like, hey, well, what's underneath that? Like, what does that mean for you? And what does doing X, Y, and Z, how is that? What is the important? Help me understand the importance of that. And again, really at the core of all of this is I'm trying to keep my kids safe.
Yeah.
I love my kid. I want them to be successful. I don't want them to end up homeless in a van under the bridge, right? Like,
Totally. What you're describing is parent fear.
hmm
It's fear of outcomes, you know,
that
and
you don't have control over, actually.
yeah, I mean, this is a fascinating thing, you know, to dive into. But, you know, when I think about my ultimate goal as a parent is just to, like you said, to maintain a long-term relationship. When I'm 90, I want to die with my children around me, not having not seen me forever, you know? And so I think often about, you know, do I want to lose this battle right now to win the long-term war?
Right.
And yet it's still so hard because our role as a parent is to guide and to protect and do all of those things. So, you know, my mantra the last several months is a parent, I have to figure out this balance between grit. I got to teach them grit,
Yeah.
and I have to, you know, offer grace. And grit and grace becomes this really challenging thing to navigate, you know, as a parent of, you know, I think that the generation right now gets so much flack of they're soft or they don't want to work or all of these things. Um, what's your take on that? You know, this balancing of grit and grace, teaching them grit so that they can live in the world and, you know, be a functioning adult, and yet grace enough to where they can make mistakes
Yeah.
and to know it's safe.
Well, I just know I am so grateful as a human when I've made mistakes and I've been offered grace. Like, and in those moments, those have been the biggest powerful change agents
Yeah.
in my life, you know, looking back on things. And I think that as a parent, you know, one of the things that you always have to make a choice of is, are you trying to punish or are you trying to teach? And if you're trying to punish, there's lots of ways to punish, but why?
Yeah.
You know, like, and I think sitting with that can be kind of unsettling, you know, but I love that idea of grace and grit because we can't hold their hand forever. I mean, but this is like where it's also giving them enough room to like go lunch, you know,
Yeah.
and come home, go out and explore the world and come home.
Yeah. Go
And
to Africa
yeah,
with your
go
little
to
sister
Africa.
and good luck, you know, like, like that
as
sounds so extreme. And
as the
yet
coup is happening in Kenya that we didn't know, right? But it's
totally.
like, yeah, you know, but kind of tying back into that, my parents instilled in me that they believed in me and I could do hard things. And I think that, you know, like I think that's our responsibility. Like, our job isn't to be our kid's friend. You know, like my teenage daughter used to get so offended when I'm like, I'm not your friend. Like,
Yeah.
I'm your mom, you know, and I love being with you, but that's really different, you know, and my role is to help keep you be safe. And so let's figure out how we can help you be safe. But I think that, you know, giving grace and teaching how to give grace to somebody is such an important, crucial part of being a successful human. Because at the end of the day, like, that's what you carry with you. You don't carry with you your millions of dollars or the people you squash to get on top or any of the other things. Like, you know, I think that it's kind of funny being in this. I don't know if you're in that same boat, but in this middle-aged boat of, you know, looking ahead, and there's so much still ahead, and also looking back and having the wisdom to be able to see things more clearly than you could even a couple years ago.
Oh yeah.
And one of the quotes that I love, you know, is from Brene Brown. But she says, you know, I'll like mush it up for a second. But, you know, basically, like, middle age is the time the universe takes you by the shoulders and shakes you and is like, I'm not kidding around anymore. You know,
Totally.
like, figure your stuff out. and and again, how awesome it is to have grace to be able to figure stuff out in your 40s, you know, and in your 50s. And I think that it really, like, it's never too late. And so let's say that you did the best that you knew how to do in that time, and there's some repair that needs to happen. It's never too late to change. It's never too late to heal. And, you know, like, that is one of the things that I love so much about the work that I do is watching this transpire, like, over and over and over again, you know, and having these beautiful life lessons and seeing, like, the parents that I work with be able to repair well into adulthood at times, you know, where repair has been needed with their own children. Again, when everyone's doing the best they knew how to do in the time that they were in.
Yeah. Maya Angelou.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, do the best that you can. And when you know better, do better. Right. You know, what's
Absolutely.
fascinating it to me is I'm listening to you. I mean, you're a child play, expert, and we're really talking about parenting, and so much of that is coaching the parents so that they can go coach children or be the coach in the home. Is that actually what happens? I mean, kids are coming and you're doing play therapy, but in reality, you're retraining a family system, a parenting system as well.
And helping to build up security within the relationship, because the reality is I can't change anything for anybody. I don't have that power.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't. Like, if people want changes in their life, they actually have to be the ones to create them and make them. And so much of the work that we do with children has to be done in conjunction with the families, you know, and I oftentimes, talk about, like, in my trainings of people, of like, our job is to be a lily pad. And so, like, my job is to be a lily pad. And for that little frog or family of frogs, like, just come and have a place of reprieve and to rest and repair and restore so they can make the leap again to another lily pad. But, I think when we can teach parents how to be that same type of safe haven, and to see their kids in a different light, like, there's just those little shifts. Even, I mean, we've been hearing this more and more, and like those of you on social media and follow parenting, influencers. But, like, there's been like a big push of like attachment language coming into parenting. Like, so, reframing like attention seeking to connection seeking, and noticing what that feels like in your body, and looking at your child through that lens. Like, are they trying to connect right now? Like, is that possible that they could be just actually wanting to connect with me?
Yeah, go figure.
Yeah. I mean, but once you get that, it changes everything.
When we first started, you described a parent asking their child for forgiveness, apologizing. And it was a scenario, you went through it very quickly, but it struck me how you described that and you said that. And I remember still a time when my wife's sitting with our children, our oldest child, and at one point saying, "Hey, we suck at this. You know, we've
Yes.
never done, you haven't done this before. We definitely haven't done this before," and apologize. And I still remember this moment in the relationship between my wife and I and our child. He was a teen, and apologizing to him, and how that felt was an entirely different feeling we had never had in our house before. And all of a sudden it was a space where, if it's hard to describe, but he knew that he could mess up, but he knew we were going to mess up too. And so all of us were just mess ups, and it changed everything. It wasn't about standards or perfectionism or, this kind of like, hey, we're going to test you every day. And when you fail, we're going to call you out. In fact, we're going to rub your nose in it a little bit. We're going to pile on a little bit. But it changed everything in the dynamic. What was that about? To be honest, it wasn't clinical. We didn't know what we were doing. It just felt at the time like, if the roles were reversed, how would we change, the relationship? And I just remember thinking, I wish my parents would have said sorry, even though they were awesome. But there were moments of like, this is heavy. I was the youngest of 5 kids, and there was a lot of perfectionism and standard talk, a lot of church talk, to be frank. And it was heavy. I'll just say that. So what was going on there, to get into the psychology of just that moment of a parent apologizing to child and what that does?
I think the biggest thing is that space of there's room for all of us in here. And in that space, again, like those mirror neurons, right? Am I
Yeah.
safe? Am I safe? Am I safe? Am I safe? When a parent can come and say, I messed up, I'm really sorry. I shouldn't have yelled. I shouldn't have cussed you out. I shouldn't have done 5 different, billion things today that I did wrong, right?
Yeah.
Not in that self-depreciating way, but just being genuinely like accountable. it gives permission for growth to happen. And I think that that's what you're describing. Like, instead of having this be at odds all the time, all of a sudden it opened up the permission for safety and for growth to happen. And growth is never comfortable, you
Yeah.
know? And I think, when we can do that as parents, I mean, not only are we modeling like healthy behavior and pro-social skills and all that kind of stuff that we want our kids to be able to do, like, like recognizing empathy, recognizing compassion, recognizing when you mess up and you should apologize because that's what nice people do, right? Like,
Yeah.
but in that moment of genuine, authentic, I can't even speak words anymore. I'm sorry, I messed up. All of a sudden, that opens up this whole new world together where connection can be at the core and there can be room for growth.
Yeah. There's so much there. I mean, in a way, it's kind of shocking because in a very Christian culture, where we live, you would think that of all the places that the forgiveness and the standard and like acceptance, would occur mostly in home, but it tends to be standard.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have thoughts on that? Just
I have lots and lots of thoughts on that. I don't know if you really want me to get into this.
say more if you don't mind, because I think that, I mean, the byproduct of this environment, right, is that I hear weekly, if not daily, and you do too, because of the world we're in, that teens are taking their own lives.
Yep.
And the immediate jump is, well, what was going on? The child must have had something going on. And although they do, there's a system that is going on around us of perfectionism, high standard, hide all the anxiety under the surface. And then just one day when there isn't safety that you just described, well, if I can't have safety at home, I don't have it at school, I don't have it in my church organization because standard is so high, there's no place for me here now.
Yeah.
I'm out.
Yep. And, it's an unfortunate irony because Utah is supposed to be like the family-friendly state.
Yeah.
We have the highest rate of teen homelessness in the nation, and the highest rate of those teens are LGBTQIA kids who have been kicked out after they've come out or been outed to their family. We do have a problem here. And I think that, like, how to say this very diplomatically, I think in all of our good intent as humans and as Christians, right, we get stuck on the rules instead of like the person that we say that we follow. And I think when you are letter of the law versus spirit of the law, it makes a really big difference. And I think, within the culture that we're residing on, there is so much pressure for everybody. And that's where, again, like finding your own inner compass of what is right for me and my family. And what do I actually believe and think about this situation? And, like, where am I in this and trying to follow like the collective rules and the collective good and all the things that are there? And I think, part of what makes organized religion successful is conformity. And we're taught a lot of big, scary things in Mormon culture. And this might kind of get me outcasted here. But, right, like people who leave are bad and they're scary. Like we have names for them.
Yeah.
And we refer to them in certain ways, right? And like
Yeah.
all of a sudden, like, oh, that's bad. And that's scary. So let's not have our kids mixed with your kids, kind of a thing. And I think that, going back to what we were talking about, where there's so much pressure to fit in and to be part of, and I'm just trying to keep my kids safe. Like I'm trying to keep safe. Like that's a big part of things. And I think when that becomes the primary lens, sometimes you lose sight of what's most important.
Which is?
Your little one that's hurting. And sometimes you can't even see the hurt because it's like you kind of get your blinders on of like, there's one way to do things, and I'm trying to keep you safe, so we're going to do this one way of doing things.
Yeah.
But, I think like a lot of times we're taught like, it's like, stay on the straight and narrow, and you're taught that narrow is about an inch wide. But you're straight and narrow, if you open it like this, all of a sudden you can breathe. Right?
Yeah.
And it doesn't have to be confined in walls on both sides. And I think, opening up that space, and again, like that permission for self to be part of that, of where's my compass in this? So I'm not just, following along because that's what I'm supposed to do,
Yeah.
but where am I in this? And I think that's a really scary, vulnerable place to let yourself go, let alone let it blossom in your kids.
So, Claire,
Yes.
let's close this or get close to. We'll come back for episode number 2 with you for sure at some point. But freestyle about this idea of conviction versus, navigating this, the compass instead of society or following, a certain way, but trying to navigate, what's in your heart and right for, you and your child.
So in clinical speak, in attachment theory, there is this term that's called differentiation. And what it means is that in healthy relationships, there's room for each of us to have autonomy and our own thinking, our own path, our own perspectives, while still being connected to each other. It's this idea of interdependence. So in families, if we allow for autonomy and differentiation, you actually have a healthier family unit. It's kind of like if you have like a fruit tree and you never prune it, it gets all tangled up and condensed, and it may look giant, but it's not actually going to produce very much fruit, right? And so if you want a healthy tree in the wintertime, I'm just learning about this because I let my trees die. But in the wintertime is actually like the best time to prune, which kind of seems like that would be a weird time to go cut off all the branches when you need all the most energy. But that, actually helps your tree be healthy. And you can see where each branch ends and begins. And in families, when we can allow for this, you're going to have such a healthier, happier, more securely connected family than trying to squish everybody into a little box with the same beliefs and the same lifestyle and the same everything. And that actually creates enmeshment. And instead of individuation and autonomy, which produces self-confidence and a compass and, this ability to launch yourself, you keep everybody entangled and trapped in there. And sometimes that feels like you're doing the safest thing, but then nobody gets to blossom in the way that they could. And so I think, when we're thinking about how do I have this balance as a parent, because we do have to keep our kids safe, and kids are dumb, especially teenagers. I mean, holy cow. I mean, it's amazing any of us survived those years, right?
Right.
Let alone young adulthood. That's a whole other kind of dumb. And when we think about why we come back home and thinking about what home means, and for everybody, that's going to be different. When you choose to create your own home because your family of origin is unsafe for whatever reason, you actually lose the people that mean the most to you, oftentimes by good intent. But when there's not permission to blossom, you either have to give up to survive or you have to leave. There usually isn't a middle ground. And, for those people later in life, they find and create their own type of family where they can have safety and permission to be autonomous and permission to thrive. And I think that, for most adults that I work with and that I have worked with, where that has been the outcome, whether their own children have, discontinued relationships and they're mourning and grieving that, or they've been the child who's had to discontinue family relationships, the grief that is there is just indescribable on both ends, because we, like, from a neurobiological sense, are wired for connection, and we are wired to connect to our family. I mean, and that's like how humans have continued to exist all these centuries, when really we're like the weakest species on the planet. We're no match for a saber-toothed tiger,
Right.
But that's how we've evolved and kept each other going, is through these bonds of connection. But in order to have a healthy bond of connection, there has to be safety. And and we can't experience safety if there's not permission to grow in there. And so I think that goes back to that idea as a parent of, am I trying to punish or am I trying to teach? And part of teaching is having a lot of space in there, which can be hard and scary as a parent. When you have a kid that's making scary choices, it is terrifying, right? And when you're in that space where you're like, nothing I can do is making this better, it is terrifying. Being a parent is terrifying. Like, on your best of days, it's still so hard. Like, I think if anybody told us what it was actually going to be like, we probably wouldn't do it.
Right. Yeah. Ignorance, right?
Yes.
They're so cute when they're small. When a parent is in that moment, when the decisions are terrifying, they have no control, it feels out of control. What is the very base? Just do this. Is it love? Is it hug them? Is it what do you kind of whittle it all down to? And I know that sounds like there's like some silver bullet to it all, but when someone just is out of choices as a parent, what do you tell them?
To get their own therapy first and foremost, because you need a place to grieve and to figure out what you need and what your life jacket is going to be, so that you can be a life jacket to your kid. And I used to think like having a secure attachment, having a safe relationship would like be the all protector against the world and everything else. And what I found from personal and professional experience is my job is to be a life jacket, but I can't stop a storm from coming, but I can give a life jacket. And I think when the message is I love you no matter what, and you can come home, right? I mean, home is sometimes like when things have gotten really scary and out of control, like there may need to be limits on like where home is, but home is oftentimes like in the pocket of your heart, right? And I think when a child knows at their very core that they're loved, that is the thing that brings them home. And there may need to be hard decisions that are made, and
Still boundaries.
and still boundaries, and still there may be really hard things that you have to go through as a family. And if that child knows at the bottom of it all, like, I'm loved, that is what's going to save them, truly.
Yeah, I mean, the ultimate to lose the battles to win the war
Mm-hmm.
is that they'll still come home at their most humble point.
Right.
Struggling point is that they're still a safe place.
Yep.
So I often wonder, as you sit with families and with people, parents who may be struggling they're fear-based, they're scared, right? This whole idea of try to control. Years ago, my wife and I talked about you're crushing the Tweety bird, the idea
Mm-hmm.
of you really want to protect the Tweety bird and you hold it in your two hands. And yet, as they get into the teen years, that your hands get tighter and tighter. And at some point, right, you're crushing the Tweety bird. I think that there are lots of families who are really struggling with children who may be making really hard choices, and they're struggling in life. But there's also this flip side, which is the perfectionistic family that is controlling, and they're also struggling. They're struggling in a different way. This is the child, to be frank, that seems oftentimes that it's the scariest because you don't know that
Right.
they're struggling. Everything seems fine. And then all of a sudden it's not. And there's a tragic, outcome. Is that type of a scenario where there's a lot of control, that there's not a lot of space for grace, a lot of messing up to occur?
Well, there's not permission for autonomy and growth to be developed, right? Like it keeps you small in the box. And the good intent behind it is I'm trying to keep you safe. So we just do X, Y, and Z, and that's what we do in our family, right? Like that's
Yeah.
your identity, and this is what we do.
Yeah.
And so again, you're either going to squish yourself in, or you're going to bust out. But I think as a parent, you have to ask yourself at what expense, and a lot of times, I mean, there's like, not to scare parents, but there's like a whole other world happening than that we are privy to. And even being a kid therapist and having kids, there's lots of things that happen that I don't know until much later. And I know things. you know,
You
you
hear
know?
stuff.
I hear stuff, and I push lots of, I was definitely the kid that was like, don't touch it, it's hot. Oh, okay, let me see, right?
Yeah.
Like I had to do a lot of hard learning. And there's a lot of things happening that most of us have no idea is happening. But if we have closed off all communication and channels of communication because there's not room for differentiation and individualized experience, then we're really not going to know. And so
They'll just hide it.
they'll just hide it. Yep.
Yeah, which exacerbates the problem.
Right.
You hide it. Now my parents don't know. I lie to my parents. Now I feel shame every time I go home. I don't want to be with them. Now there's distance.
Yeah.
The snowballing occurs. Yeah. I mean, this is me, right? In so many ways, this is me as a teen. And so I get it, which is why I'm asking the questions. Like, if I could go back, and again, my parents are amazing, but they're just,
And
they
they're
just,
human
they just
too,
are.
right?
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, I kind of laugh with some of my friends who are parents. I'm like, all right, my next book that I'm going to write is like a parenting book. If you're not totally messing it up with one, you are with the other one, right? Like, I mean, it's just this constant landmine as a parent of,
Yeah.
especially when you have more than one kid. And it's like, okay, finally did it right with this one. And like, this one just blew up. Okay, like I just can't win, it feels like some days.
Yeah.
And I think you can do the very best that you can do. And your parents can do the very best that they knew how to do. And still not all your needs can be met. And they still may have made mistakes. And you still are going to make mistakes as a parent, and I feel like in order to meet like every need of every child that we have, I mean, I would need like 17,000 of me, right? And I'm still going to get it wrong.
Yeah.
Let alone when there's just the two of us trying to do this, doing the best that we can. And so I think that this is where, as parents too, it's also important that we give ourselves grace in it and accountability. So the definition of crazy is doing the same thing over and over and over again and expecting a different result, right?
Yeah.
You've heard that? So as a parent, if you're doing the same thing over and over and over again, expecting a different result to happen and it's not, maybe it's time to shake things up a little bit and try something different. And, I'm a big believer in that you have to buy what you sell. And so I'm really open with parents. I'm so grateful I've had good therapists along the way that I go to and that I have gone to.
Yeah.
And when I had no idea, when I was stuck in the mud with my own kids and couldn't see my way out, I had my own safe place I could go dump and sort. And
I love that. Dump and sort.
It's like a giant
What a
jigsaw puzzle,
great,
right?
what a great experience. Just go dump and sort it. Yeah, that's awesome.
It makes such a big difference. It was funny. One of my teenage clients was like, I told him that I went to therapy, and he's like, wait a second. So I go to you go to this therapist. That therapist goes to the, he's like, when does this end? Like, who's the master therapist? And I'm like, oh, there's not one. We're all just doing the best that we can.
Absolutely.
But
That's humanity though, right? This
Yep.
idea, and you talked about it in the very beginning of mentorship. Like therapy is just mentorship. It's coaching. It is, I mean, there's such a stigma at times, about it, but it's just this string of humanity, right? Mothering, lifting, loving, I think it's such a cool thing. You have a book coming out.
I do.
Comment on this. Let's talk about it for a second, because
Yeah.
all of this expertise and all this is coming out in so many ways. You have several books and you're on everything. But what's this one about?
So this book that just came out, it just released through Wiley, and it's on the repercussions of trauma. And so looking at how trauma impacts individual and the collective around the individual. And so, like with anything, like it's never just one person. And so it's taking a deep dive into kind of the different intersections of life and how trauma impacts and influences that.
Will you give a definition of trauma? Because I think oftentimes my JV knowledge of all things, mental health, I think trauma tends to be sexual abuse, major, traumatic life events, people who have seen war, catastrophic things, which are traumatic, obviously. But describe your definition of trauma.
So I actually love Lenore Terr's definition of trauma. And she says that trauma occurs when a sudden, overwhelming event or series of events assaults the person from the outside. So there are like the great big things that happen around us, right? With the natural disasters, with the war, with the car crash, like these big tangible events that are absolutely trauma. But what is usually most traumatizing about the event is the lack of connection through it. And what we're finding in traumaology and trauma research and in the field is relational trauma is much more devastating than any of these life event trauma, like these big, like tangible, like milestone, like the hurricane that happened and I lived through, or the tornado or whatever happened. But when there is unpredictability, chaotic, hurtful, painful relationships happening, and where there's not safety consistently and predictability, that can be some of the most devastating types of trauma because it's invisible. So if you break your arm and you're in your cast, people know that you're hurt.
Yeah.
But if you're in an abusive relationship, a lot of people have no idea that that's happening. Right? And sometimes it's, the parent who's like the pillar of society doing the most devastating work on the behind the scenes, on the kid. But I think, trauma, when you don't have access to safety, there's trauma. And so that is emotional, spiritual, sexual, physical safety.
I love that. Just a broader definition. It deepens people's experiences in life and what informs them. I would say that my childhood was absolutely safe. When I look back on what shaped me and who I am today, only later in life did I understand that I have serious trauma connected to my inability to learn in elementary school. Yeah. And I would not have thought that. I would have thought, well, I'm just not smart, or ADHD, or whatever it was. I didn't know all of those things, but even later in life, as I started to understand and look back and think about what was going on, there was so much tied to those years of school, and no abuse of any teachers or parent or leaders or anyone. So abuse wasn't it. It was system related, traumatized going to a system of not safe, not safe, right? And so this is something we're going to have to double click on another time, but I would love for you to just describe again the book when it's, when it's coming out or is out, and just so that people can get it and get a better understanding of what trauma is.
Yeah, so it is out currently, and we purposely chose and wrote this book in a way that is kind of out into general psychology, so anybody could read this and benefit from this. And so it's called The Repercussions of Trauma, and actually it's called Trauma: The Repercussions of Individual and Collective Trauma. Actually, the main title. But it's just taking a deep dive and a systemic look of how the ripple effect of trauma impacts more than just the individual, because I think oftentimes we think about like the one person that's hurt, instead of how this has shaped the world around them and how that influences a person and vice versa. And so really taking a look into that and looking at racial trauma, sexual trauma, physical trauma, natural disasters. I mean, kind of
Yeah.
any school trauma, any of these things that, I mean, when we think about what has left the biggest imprint, for better or for worse, it's usually rooted in some type of trauma in our lives.
Yeah. What's interesting about that that I wanted to circle back to as we close, the premise of Brainstoke is the struggle and stoke stories, of life. When you work with people through trauma, does it tend to be that the trauma or that experience, when dealt with in a productive way, becomes a positive thing in people's lives? It's a driver for doing and becoming,
I don't.
even if it's to go away from it. I mean,
So another favorite quote of mine, especially when working with children in trauma, is we can't change the child's story, but what we can do is help the child change how they see themselves in the story. And I think that is true no matter how big the child is, right? From 3 to 103. And so I don't think anybody's going to look back on their trauma and be like, oh, what a blessing. I'm so glad I was sexually assaulted when I was 14 years old, right? Like, no.
Absolutely.
But that doesn't have to be your identity. Like, this can be a chapter of your book. And what we find and what research has shown is that when there's like an integration of the trauma, and safety can be established or reestablished, and repair can happen when there wasn't safety. This is how we create a new equilibrium and how you can move on and let this be a chapter instead of your story. And I think when trauma remains your story and left in that unprocessed state, that's where your identity gets rooted into that and you can't move beyond it.
Yeah. I love that. I love the idea of you changing your narrative, but the same story.
Yeah.
And that is so empowering. It's been so helpful for me to digest and understand that in an entirely different way. So, yeah, thank you. Anything else you want to say? Comment on, advice, thoughts?
I just think, we need each other in this world. Life is too hard to do all by yourself. And I think if you're a parent or, any person out there listening to this, like, I would just say, like, we need each other, and seeking out when your storm is getting pretty big and scary, don't hide in it, but reach out and connect through it. And it's always better. It always feels better in the end if you can do that.
Awesome. Thanks,
So,
Claire.
Thanks so much. It's been so great.
Oh, it's so great. We appreciate it. You've had your daily dose.